My name is Michelle, and I work in an office. I'm 31 years old, and my husband John is 33. We actually met through a friend's introduction, and now we've been married for 2 years. When I was growing up, I was pretty sheltered, being an only child. I went to a regular public school until middle school, but then I switched to an all-girls private school until college. You know how it is with all-girls schools. There's a lot of admiration among friends, but I never really thought about dating guys seriously. Sure, I went out with a couple of guys in my early 20s, but nothing really clicked for marriage. I always figured I'd meet someone eventually, but time flew by, and suddenly I was in my 30s. My parents started getting worried, especially my dad. He started suggesting I meet some guys he found on matchmaking websites, and one of those guys turned out to be John, my husband now. After we met a few times, John told me he had feelings for me. He's a really kind person who respects his parents a lot. I'm the same way, so I felt like we shared important values. That's why I decided to marry him. Our wedding was organized pretty quickly, and our families and friends were all there to support us. I was thrilled and hoped that our happiness would last forever. But not long after we got married, John's dad got sick and passed away. John started spending a lot of time taking care of his mom, which is totally understandable. He's always visiting her and even goes on trips with her. While he still cares about me, it sometimes feels like his mom comes first in everything. It's a bit frustrating, but other than that, things are okay. I guess this is just how marriage is, so I've learned to accept it and make compromises. Lately, I've been finding a lot of happiness in entering sweepstakes and winning prizes. It's been mostly little things like makeup and snacks. But then I hit the jackpot, a pair of tickets to Miami. I couldn't believe it when I got the call. It was the first time I ever won something so big. But then came the tough part, deciding who to take. John had just gone on a trip with his mom, and he usually pays for his own travels. So I thought, why not give this amazing opportunity to my parents? I hurried over to their house and shared the news. Guess what? I won a trip to Miami. Why don't you two go? My mom was ecstatic, saying it had been ages since they'd gone on a trip abroad. However, my dad didn't seem as excited about the trip. I've got work commitments, Michelle, he explained. But you still have some paid leave left, don't you? I countered. True, but this is a busy season for our industry, especially for me as the department head. Taking time off isn't easy. My mom then suggested, Michelle, if you can manage to get leave, why don't you and I go? I thought about it and agreed. You're right, Mom. It's too good of an opportunity to miss. Since my dad couldn't make it, I decided to ask my boss for time off the next day. Thankfully, work was slow, and I got permission without any trouble. After work, I swung by a bookstore at the station to pick up a guidebook on Miami, filled with excitement for the trip. As I neared home, I noticed the lights were already on. John must have gotten back home already, I realized. I better hurry up with dinner, I thought to myself. As I opened the door, instead of John's shoes, I spotted a pair of women's shoes I recognized. Michelle, what's the meaning of leaving the house empty at this hour? Scolded my mother-in-law. Oh, I didn't know you were here, I responded. It doesn't matter if I'm here or not. It's time for John to be home, and you should be preparing dinner and getting things ready for him, she lectured. Living nearby, she has a spare key, courtesy of John. I understand she feels lonely since her husband passed away, but her unexpected visits and presumptions of entitlement don't sit well with me. Plus, she holds onto old-fashioned beliefs about a wife's role, and she's not a fan of me working. Every time we cross paths, she finds something to criticize or make snide remarks about, which makes it difficult for me to warm up to her. Why the long face and the detour instead of coming straight home? She continued, You're such a useless wife. Let me see what you bought, my mother-in-law demanded. Please stop, I objected, but she ignored me and grabbed the bag containing the guidebook. What's all this? What do you plan to do in Miami? How extravagant, she exclaimed. No, it's a prize I won. I'm giving it as a gift to my parents, I explained. Well, nobody told me about this, she retorted. Just as we were arguing, John walked in. I'm back. What's going on? He asked. Welcome home, John. Michelle won a trip to Miami, my mother-in-law informed him. How thoughtless of you to give it to Michelle's parents without discussing it first. I would have loved to go, John said. I didn't know about the trip to Miami either. I was thinking of giving it to my parents, I responded. How many people can go on this trip? John inquired. It's for 2 people, I replied. You should have told me beforehand. I would have loved to go too. Why are you making decisions on your own? John questioned. I thought about going with just the 2 of us. But this time, I wanted to give it to my parents, I explained. You're mistaken. This time Mom and I are going and you're staying home, John declared firmly, cutting off my protests. No way. I won this. I'm going to give it as a gift to my parents, I insisted. We can plan something else another time, right? Mom really wants to go, so please try to understand, I pleaded. What are you even saying? You just went on a trip with your mom not long ago. Why can't I use my own money to go on a trip? Anyway, this time Mom and I are going. If you don't like it, we can get a divorce, John declared, dropping the word like a bombshell. The mention of divorce from my husband, used as a threat, made me feel a sudden wave of detachment towards him. Fine, do as you please, I responded, deciding to step back. My husband and mother-in-law, oblivious to my internal turmoil, seemed pleased with themselves. You should have been more understanding from the start, they chided. Ignoring their smug remarks, I began to consider my next steps to address the situation. The following day, I sought counsel from my parents, sharing the ordeal with them. My mom, who had been excited about the trip, seemed disappointed, but she understood the situation. I understand. If that's how it is, we can't help it. It's better to avoid any tension between you 2, so don't worry, she reassured me. Feeling guilty about letting her down, I decided to make things right. During my lunch break, I called the airline and requested to change the trip to Miami to include my husband and mother-in-law instead. However, the operator explained that once the reservation is made, changes aren't allowed, and the tickets are only valid for the winner. This was clearly stated in the documents they sent me. Realizing my mistake, I told the operator I would decline the prize. I chose not to tell my husband and the others about this and decided that if they really wanted to go, they could purchase tickets themselves. That evening, when my husband came home from work, he brought up the trip. Hey Michelle, did you call the airline? Did you tell them we're going to Miami with Mom? He asked. I made the call and handed over the winning documents and tickets to my husband. Here, take a look at these. All the details are in there. It's important to read them, I urged. Knowing he probably wouldn't bother reading them, I handed them over anyway. True to form, he just glanced at them and set them on his shelf. Try to see this as a kind gesture for your mom, I suggested. Sure, I'm more than happy to stay home. I can't wait to see their reactions, he agreed. On the day of the trip, John seemed unusually tense, as if something was weighing heavily on him. As the departure day arrived, John and his mother encountered delays at the airport. What's going on? Can you explain this? He demanded, looking at me with confusion and frustration. As we've explained, these tickets are non-transferable, and if the winner isn't present, they become invalid. This is clearly outlined in our policy. Anyone else attempting to use them would need to pay the full fare. The airline representative reiterated. John and his mother had already splurged on luxury hotels, stretching their budget thin. Then, at the airport ticket counter, they encountered yet another setback. I'm terribly sorry, but there seems to be an issue. Could you please try using a different payment method? The attendant requested. That's impossible. This card has been working perfectly fine. Why is this happening now? John exclaimed in frustration. I'm afraid we can't diagnose the problem here. You may want to contact your card issuer for assistance, the attendant advised. With no other option, John had to resort to using another credit card and then reach out to me. Hey, what's happening? The tickets you gave us aren't usable, and now my credit card's been declined, he explained over the phone. Did you bother reading the fine print on the ticket? It clearly states they're invalid if the winner isn't present. And as for your credit card issue, that's news to me, I retorted. Not your card, John clarified. Well, I've reported my card lost. I couldn't find it in my wallet, so I suspected you might have taken it. Thankfully, it hasn't been misused, I explained. That's not amusing. You won't get away with this when we're back, John threatened. That's entirely your own doing. What you did amounts to theft, I countered. You know what, woman? I'm divorcing you. Get out, John declared angrily. Fine. Just as I expected you'd say. As you wish. I'll agree to the divorce, I replied calmly. Truth be told, I had already planned to leave for my parents' house before John told me to go. I had already packed my bags, using the paid leave I had taken for this trip. As I left the house, I made sure to take the passbook and seal so he couldn't access our savings. I also informed the neighbors that we would be getting divorced. Upon reviewing our savings for potential division in the event of a divorce, I discovered that the funds had been depleted multiple times. I had no recollection of making these withdrawals, indicating that John was responsible. Further investigation, comparing the withdrawal dates with my daily blog entries, revealed that the money was withdrawn during the period when John and my mother-in-law were on vacation. I confided in my parents about John's proposition for divorce, his unauthorized use of my credit card, and his utilization of our joint savings for the trip with my mother-in-law. As I recounted the situation, my parents' expressions shifted from concern to sternness. I can't believe John would stoop to such deceit. I'm deeply sorry, it's my fault for arranging your marriage, my dad apologized, bowing his head in shame. His anger towards John was evident. This falls on my shoulders. Leave it to me, he assured me, taking responsibility. In reality, my dad held a high-ranking position at the parent company of John's employer and occasionally conducted audits. Despite another colleague being originally assigned, my dad rearranged his schedule at short notice to personally audit John's company. During the audit, he invited John's superior, an executive at the subsidiary, for a meal. Given the hierarchical structure, John's superior was visibly anxious, attempting to curry favor with my dad while struggling with nerves. During the meal, my dad took the opportunity to inform John's superior about my situation. In fact, my daughter is going through a divorce. It appears that the main issues stemmed from her husband's excessive dependence on his mother. If it were just that, I might have advised her to persevere, but it seems he also misused my daughter's credit card and depleted her savings without her consent. Under such circumstances, I couldn't in good conscience recommend reconciliation. By the way, your subordinate, or rather, former son-in-law, I suppose, is John. How has his performance been lately? My dad inquired. It's a busy time, but I haven't seen him much around the office, John's superior responded. Upon learning about my impending divorce from my dad, John's superior sensed trouble and decided to look into the matter further. John, being the son-in-law of the parent company's director, was well known within the company and received some preferential treatment. However, a closer examination might reveal more about his conduct. I'll arrange for a lawyer recommended by my dad to handle the divorce proceedings. You'll receive written confirmation soon, covering matters like alimony and property division, I informed John. John assured me that he wouldn't let things slide, but it seemed that neither he nor his mother would have an easy time upon their return from Miami. Sometime after John and my mother-in-law returned from their trip to Miami, John paid a visit to my parents' house. Michelle, what's this certified mail about? I'm strapped for cash. I can't afford to pay any alimony. And this property division, it's just a marital spat. There's no need to take it this far. I've apologized, so please come back, John pleaded. What are you saying? Have you even read the contents of the certified mail? Your mother's constant mental abuse, not to mention depleting our savings and attempting to use my credit card without permission. There's no way we can reconcile, right? I countered. Please, don't say that. Since you left, it's been difficult for both Mom and me. Have you been receiving icy stares from the neighbors, or have there been issues at work? John inquired, his demeanor stiffening. I suppose I hit the nail on the head, I remarked. How did you? Well, who knows? What do you think the reason might be? If you reflect on your actions, you might understand, I replied. I can't reconcile with you, and you'll have to face the consequences. Prepare yourself. Also, please communicate through the attorney from now on. If you persist in lingering, I'll involve the security company, John warned sternly. When I mentioned involving the security company, John finally relented and left with a heavy heart. In truth, everything John had come pleading about was orchestrated by my father and me. Before returning to my parents' home, I went to our neighbors and spun a tale about being kicked out by my husband and mother-in-law after they stole the plane tickets I had won in a lottery. Drawing from my past experience in the drama club during my student years, my performance was remarkably convincing. Since my husband and mother-in-law returned from their Miami trip, rumors and gossip have swirled around them in the neighborhood. My mother-in-law was mortified to learn from a local busybody that she was being shunned because of rumors like, "You took your daughter-in-law's winning travel tickets and threw her out, didn't you?" But now, it's your turn to hear the full story. Following this incident, my father initiated an investigation at my husband's workplace. It was discovered that my husband, who happened to be the son-in-law of a department head in the parent company, had been abusing his position. He frequently took time off during busy periods to travel with his mother-in-law, habitually arrived late or left early, and was even found to be embezzling company funds. Given the severity of his actions, he was promptly dismissed from his job. The company then issued a statement to all its employees, declaring an end to the preferential treatment previously extended to family members of senior staff. Thanks to the lawyer my father hired, my divorce proceedings unfolded smoothly, and I finally obtained my official single status. The savings my husband had depleted were divided evenly based on their original amounts before his spending spree, and I received fair compensation. My detailed blog entries served as evidence of his emotional abuse, validating my experiences. Feeling liberated after getting justice against my husband and mother-in-law, I didn't want to hoard the compensation from the divorce. Instead, I decided to indulge and treat myself. Coordinating with my father's company holiday, I planned a vacation, seizing the opportunity to embark on the overseas trip I had previously missed out on. Initially undecided on our destination, we eventually settled on Miami, taking into account my mother's preferences. Together with my parents, we meticulously planned our itinerary, anticipating days filled with exploring crystal-clear seas, vibrant coral reefs, indulging in shopping, and relishing our long-overdue family vacation. Recognizing the sorrow I had caused my parents through my divorce, I was determined to make amends and create lasting memories with them. While thoughts of remarriage were far from my mind at the moment, I remained open to the possibility of finding genuine companionship in the future. Uncertain about what lies ahead, I focused on the excitement of our upcoming trip with my parents, cherishing the present happiness and looking forward to whatever the future may bring. My name is Maria Dalton, and I'm about to turn 27. I've been married for 5 years and have a 4-year-old son named Martin. At first, I worked full-time, but now I work part-time at the same company. My husband is 30 years old, 3 years older than me. Kevin Carlton, who I married, seemed sweet when we were dating, but things changed after marriage. He became more controlling. Kevin has a 20-year-old sister named Jane Dalton, and he spoils her a lot, maybe because of their big age gap. Before we got married, I didn't really mind how close Jane and Kevin were. But after tying the knot, I started noticing some changes. Jane frequently drops by our place, and I end up scrambling to cater to her every whim because Kevin always caves into her demands. She shows up unannounced, morning or night, without bringing any gifts or even a thank you. She acts like I'm invisible, only talking to Kevin, saying, "Hey brother, I'm here again." Kevin, oblivious to the fact that I didn't prepare dinner for Jane, asks if she wants to eat. When I try to discreetly mention it to Kevin, he brushes it off, leaving me to serve my own dinner to Jane in the end. Then, loud enough for Jane to hear, he blames me, saying things like, "You should have made more food." Jane looks like she's going to cry and apologizes to me. Kevin comforts her and scolds me, saying things like, "You're not considerate," or "Don't be mean to my sister." Even though Jane apologizes, it's clear she feels reassured by how Kevin takes her side. It's like she enjoys it. I end up making my own meal from leftovers while they eat together. Just as I'm about to join them, Jane tells Kevin she wants to talk alone. Kevin moves me and Martin to another room. This isn't the first time. After we finish eating and clean up, I find them chatting on the sofa. They never bothered to clean up after themselves. It feels like they see me as a maid, not a wife or sister-in-law. They don't even talk to Martin. It's like I'm just a maid bringing my kid to work. I was tidying up the kitchen and getting ready to bathe Martin when Kevin suddenly called me, even though it was almost 8 p.m. He said, "Jane wants cake. Go buy it now. Get it from the shop by the station," telling me exactly where to go. But going out to buy cake would make Martin go to bed late. When I hesitated, Jane insisted, "I want it now," and Kevin rushed me, saying, "It's fine if he stays up a bit longer tonight." Then Kevin started yelling at me, blaming me for having an attitude with Jane around. I knew I'd have to go to the cake shop eventually, so I reluctantly agreed. There's a cake shop near the station that closes at 9 p.m. So if I hurry, I can make it. As I was getting ready to go, I overheard them talking, speaking loudly enough for me to hear. They were saying things like, "She's so thoughtless. And why did you marry her? Since I couldn't leave Martin alone, I decided to take him with me. While I was getting Martin ready, I heard Kevin's loud voice from the living room. If you defy me again, we'll get a divorce. Martin could hear it too. He might not understand the words, but I think he knows his parents are fighting. Trying to control my emotions, I asked Martin, "What kind of cake would you like?" He perked up and said, "Mom, I want a cake with lots of fruits." So on our way to the cake shop, we chatted about cakes, momentarily forgetting about Kevin's words. We made it to the cake shop just before it closed. Luckily, they had the cake Jane wanted. We bought 2 cakes and the fruit-loaded cake Martin desired. When we got back home, I served the cakes to Jane and Kevin. I prepared Martin's cake and brought it to the dining room. As soon as I set it down in front of Martin, Jane pointed at it and said, "Actually, I want that cake." Before I could respond, Kevin moved Martin's cake in front of Jane. Ignoring Martin's protests, Jane started eating his cake. Kevin justified it by saying, "I bought that cake with my money, so I get to choose." Unable to contain my emotions any longer, I expressed my frustration to Kevin and Jane. Kevin then threatened, "We could get a divorce, you know." Martin stopped crying but held my hand tightly, looking worried. Then, after a moment, Martin said, "Mom, I also love cake with strawberries. It's really yummy." He mentioned it while eating the cake that Jane initially wanted. I feel like I'm putting Martin through too much. 3 adults, myself included, shouldn't be subjecting a 4-year-old child to this. When I saw Jane reaching for Martin's cake, I swiftly moved his plate away. Martin happily followed me to another room, saying, "Yummy, let's go over here." Probably Kevin noticed Jane's attempt too. He apologized to her, saying, "Sorry for being so tight-fisted." I wanted to respond, but I held back, not wanting to expose Martin to the word divorce. Seeing Martin innocently enjoying his cake is heartwarming. After he finished, ignoring Kevin and Jane, we decided to have a late bath and sleep in Martin's bed. The next morning, I woke up to find Jane had already left. I was about to wake up Kevin and Martin and make breakfast when I heard Martin crying. I rushed to him to find his piggy bank, a gift from my father, broken, and all his saved money gone. It was Martin's nightly ritual to bid goodnight to his piggy bank before going to sleep. Last night was no exception. He said goodnight to it and cuddled up with me. At that time, only Kevin and Jane were in the living room. I asked Kevin about the piggy bank. He responded casually, saying that Jane needed some money, so she took it from Martin's piggy bank. Martin was still crying as I held him close. His pain was so palpable that it brought tears to my eyes. It was agonizing to see Kevin prioritize and cater to his sister Jane over our son Martin. Anger and sadness flooded over me simultaneously. "Why are you making a morning so miserable?" Kevin retorted. "Don't you think you did something wrong? Martin is crying so much." For the first time since we got married, I let my anger out towards him. I had always avoided arguing in front of Martin, but I couldn't stay silent seeing him so hurt. Kevin looked at me intensely, then went to the bedroom without saying a word, returning with something in his hand. To my shock, Kevin handed me divorce papers, something I didn't even know he had stashed away. "If you're not happy with me, then let's get a divorce," he declared, thrusting the papers at me before storming out of the house with a loud slam of the door. Martin, who had never shed tears over the issues with Kevin and Jane, seemed to have reached his breaking point. He had been crying since last night, and it broke my heart to see him in such pain. "Hey Martin, how about we skip daycare today?" I suggested, hoping to bring him some comfort. He eagerly agreed with a loud yes, flashing me a faint smile. As Martin brought a picture book from the shelf and settled onto my lap, he looked up at me with joy and asked, "Today, Mama is the teacher at daycare, right?" His innocence was like a ray of sunshine. I couldn't help but marvel at his resilience. Today, I decided that we would spend the day playing and cherishing each moment together to fill his heart with happiness. I might be causing some inconvenience at work, but when I explained the situation, they kindly granted me a day off, advising me to spend quality time with Martin. In the morning, we headed to the park, played games like hide and seek, and had a blast on the swings and slides. Upon returning home for lunch, Martin seemed tired and soon dozed off on my lap, just like he used to when he was a baby. Normally, I would use this time to catch up on chores. But today felt different, so I decided to cherish the moment and enjoy watching him sleep peacefully. As I started to drift off myself, I was startled by a noise from the front door. It was too early for Kevin to be back, so I felt uneasy. Quickly, I scooped up Martin, and grabbing only my bag with essentials, I hurriedly hid with him in the bedroom closet. I froze as I sensed someone entering the house, holding my breath as I heard a familiar voice. The person seemed to be searching for something, muttering, "I can't find it." Where did the wife hide it? Fear gripped me as I listened to the sound of rummaging, but as I focused on the voice, I recognized it. It was Jane. Questions flooded my mind. Why did she have a key? What was she searching for? I cautiously cracked open the closet door to see what she was up to. She was rifling through drawers and cabinets, then let out a frustrated sigh before making a phone call. "I searched where you said, but it's not there." "Yeah, I checked there too. If it's not there, it's a waste of time." "Okay, got it. Heading home now," she said, mentioning Kevin's name. Kevin? I wondered what they were searching for. I heard the front door lock, and when it was safe, I put Martin to bed and pondered the strange events. I was certain Kevin was involved in whatever they were looking for. If they were searching for something unknown, could it be one of my possessions? Despite their earlier conversation, I couldn't decipher why Jane had suddenly appeared at our house. Kevin felt like a stranger to me, and I was overcome with a mix of disgust and fear towards him. Hastily, I packed the essentials for Martin and myself. By the time Martin woke from his nap, I was ready to leave. "Martin, let's go to Grandpa's house," I said, and we made our way to the station, catching a train to my parents' home. Thankfully, it was just 2 stops away, so we arrived swiftly. Since I hadn't informed them beforehand, my parents were surprised, but they sensed something was wrong and welcomed us without prying. Their dog, a favorite of Martin's, greeted him eagerly, and they began playing together. Watching them, I felt a sense of relief and proceeded to recount everything that had happened with Kevin and Jane. "Perhaps Jane was searching for your bank cards," my mother suggested. It made sense. Before getting married, I had founded a successful online shop for handmade goods with friends. As the CEO of the handmade industry, I gained recognition, but when the shop flourished, I decided to focus on raising my child. I've entrusted my company to trusted friends while I focus on raising my child. I work part-time and handle most tasks from home. Though I'm still the CEO, Kevin is unaware of this. He knows about my previous role and likely suspects I have savings. I've informed him that I receive assistance from the company but left out the CEO details, letting him assume I stepped down. I haven't disclosed the full extent of my CEO position or savings to Kevin for a reason. Shortly after our marriage, I discovered his poor money management skills. He spends everything he earns. He allocates only $200 monthly for food expenses and suggested I quit my job to be a full-time housewife. An idea I never agreed to, given the financial strain of such a small allowance. After some persuasion, he reluctantly agreed to let me work part-time at my current company. To ensure I wouldn't consider divorce, he even had me sign a post-marital property waiver with a lawyer. Since Martin's birth, I've been allotted only $200 for food expenses. Consequently, I've been using my savings to cover Martin's nursery fees and clothing expenses. I've refrained from asking Kevin for money beyond the food budget, leading him to assume I have substantial savings. Jane appears to be in dire need of money, and with Kevin's belief in my savings, they may be searching for my cash cards. It all makes sense now. I maintain a separate savings account dedicated to slowly accumulating funds for Martin's future. A portion of my salary is automatically deposited into this account each month. Given their financial circumstances, it's highly likely they are seeking my cash cards. No matter how hard Jane or Kevin search, they won't find my valuables because I always keep them close, including my cash cards. However, there's still an unresolved issue. Jane might be entering our house even when we're not there, possibly with Kevin's knowledge. Following my father's advice, I decided to store my valuables in my parents' safe. Why are they so desperate for money? As I pondered this question, Martin tearfully approached my father, explaining that his piggy bank had been broken, and he couldn't keep his promise to save up. My father's face flushed with anger upon hearing Martin's story. "I'll call Kevin and talk to him," my mother suggested. While chiding my father, "Let's find out their motives." She reasoned that since Kevin had mentioned divorce, he might try to blame us and make the divorce more favorable for himself. Therefore, it's essential to calmly uncover their motives now to prevent them from escaping with excuses later on. I decided to secretly record their conversation to uncover their motives. My parents suggested consulting a lawyer who was a longtime family friend. Once back home, I started cooking dinner as usual when Kevin returned. I discreetly began recording on my phone, keeping the screen face down to avoid detection. To my surprise, Kevin immediately asked me where I kept my cash cards. When I questioned his sudden interest, he provided vague answers, attempting to deceive me. Remaining silent, I watched as Kevin's demeanor shifted to one of numbness and sadness. "Give me all your part-time earnings for my sister," he demanded, but I refused, explaining that the money was for Martin's savings. This enraged Kevin, who then angrily pushed divorce papers toward me from his bag. "You're relying on my money, so don't defy me," he retorted, dismissing the importance of saving for Martin. His words implied a greater value placed on Jane over Martin, leaving me stunned and disheartened. Upon hearing Kevin's words, I halted my meal preparations, calmly placed the divorce papers into the bag I had prepared earlier, and grasped Martin's hand, leading him to the door. Kevin's voice boomed behind us, declaring, "I'm serious about the divorce. Don't ever return." In response, I asserted, "I won't return to a home where anyone can come and go as they please," before departing. Was it too harsh to label my sister-in-law as a stranger? Following my departure, I was bombarded with messages and calls from Kevin, all of which I chose to ignore. I powered off my phone and sought refuge at my parents' house. There, I played the recording of Kevin's conversation and showed them the completed divorce papers. My parents simply advised, "Do as you see fit." I didn't harbor any love or affection for Kevin, but I still cared deeply for Martin. Some advised me to divorce Kevin to spare Martin's feelings, but I feared that divorcing could also hurt Martin. Amidst this inner turmoil, Martin voiced his hunger, prompting my mother to whip up his favorite dish, hamburgers. Tears welled up in my eyes as my mother, with a gentle smile, said to Martin, "I made these hamburgers so you and Mom can visit us anytime." After taking a bite, Martin beamed and exclaimed, "Grandma's hamburgers are the best. I want them every day," his joyful words tugging on heartstrings. I replied, "It's because these hamburgers are made with all the love I have for you," as he sweetly fed me a bite. Overwhelmed by his kindness, tears streamed down my cheeks uncontrollably. I tried to suppress them, but they kept flowing. My father reassured Martin, who was alarmed by my tears, saying, "Mommy is crying because she's so happy you gave her this hamburger. These are tears of joy, not sadness," he explained tenderly. Martin, in his innocence, remarked, "This hamburger is so yummy. If Jane were here, she'd love it too." Hearing this, I couldn't hold back my tears, and I embraced him tightly, while my father's eyes filled with emotion. Turning to Martin, I said, "Being with family is a blessing, isn't it?" He looked puzzled and asked, "Didn't Dad say only Jane is family? Is my family just Mom, Grandpa, and Grandma?" My father responded gently, "Yes, that's right," then asked Martin, "Would you like to stay here with us as family?" Martin chuckled and replied, "Of course. We're family," bringing smiles to everyone's faces. When was the last time we had such a natural meal? When did we last enjoy a meal filled with endless laughter and conversation? Despite contemplating divorce, the happiness of this meal persuaded me to finally part ways with Kevin. I planned to break the news to Martin, though the thought weighed heavily on my heart. Surprisingly, Martin seemed to understand and embrace the idea of divorce, expressing, "We'll still be a family." He happily cuddled our pet dog, affectionately referring to him as his little brother, despite the dog being older. With resolve, I began preparations for the divorce. Firstly, I promptly contacted a lawyer who was a friend of my father, arranging to meet the following day. That night, Martin slept with my father and the dog, their faint laughter bringing me comfort as I lay in bed with my mother, reminiscing about my childhood. The next morning, upon checking my smartphone, I found over 200 missed calls and messages from Kevin, reflecting his emotional turmoil. Just the sight of it drained me, prompting me to switch off my phone once more. Today, I met with the lawyer, discussing the details and confirming my decision to divorce. We finalized the paperwork, and the lawyer will meet with Kevin tomorrow to proceed. After some time, the lawyer visited my parents' house to discuss the situation. It turned out that Jane had accrued a substantial debt from gambling and excessive shopping, with Kevin serving as her guarantor. When Jane couldn't make the repayments, they devised a plan to tap into my savings. Now, Kevin wants me and Martin back and is retracting his desire for a divorce, the lawyer explained. However, the divorce papers I had submitted earlier had already been processed. When asked if this meant the divorce was finalized, the lawyer confirmed it, stating, "Yes, it's been accepted." Kevin appeared to break down, expressing his fear of losing me to another man. Despite his emotional plea, knowing that everything was settled brought me a sense of peace. I anticipated arguments over child support, but Kevin even pledged to pay $340 to support Martin every month. Later, Kevin called me. Feeling relieved after the divorce proceedings, I decided to speak with him briefly. His tone was no longer aggressive. Instead, he spoke calmly. He confessed that he believed keeping me financially dependent would prevent me from seeking a divorce. He also acknowledged his tendency to spoil his younger sister, Jane, as a misguided form of sibling love. He admitted feeling jealous of Martin, fearing he had lost me to our son. "Once I've resolved Jane's debts, I'll come back for you. Please don't remarry until then," he pleaded. However, I firmly reiterated that I no longer loved him and wouldn't reconsider our relationship. Before hanging up, I could hear him sobbing softly as he whispered, "Please be happy. Did I manage to stay strong until the end?" Discussing future plans with my parents, I decided to remain at their house until Martin grows up, and he transferred to a different nursery. Returning to my role as company president, I explained the situation to my colleagues. Later, I learned that Kevin and Jane had disclosed the divorce and their debt to their parents, resulting in their disannulment. More than the financial issues, their parents were incensed about never seeing their grandson again. Now, Kevin and Jane, once close, reside in a modest apartment, constantly blaming each other. Their actions have led to their own downfall. Today, I find happiness